Welcome to JCON. Hi, my name is Richard. I'm one of the organizers of JCON. And on behalf of the whole JCON team and our sponsors, I would like to welcome you to JCON and to the second keynote today. We'll hope you have fun joining the sessions and had fun and learned something new today. Now for our second keynote, I would like to welcome Java champion, Java 1 rockstar, and guy to ask for pragmatic advice, especially on bare words, Mr. Adam Bean. Hi, Adam, how are you?
Thank you. I'm doing great, actually. Oh, not so good because today keynote has to be with slides. But yeah, but besides that, great.
Okay. Wish you all the luck. You will make it, even though it's with slides. Have fun.
Yeah, this time slides are important. So the question is, what would a startup do? And about me, I just still enjoy Java, actually more and more. Also JavaScript, because it becomes more and more like Java. So both are great. And why the title? So usually in projects or conferences, workshops, people ask me question like, what's your opinion about years back OSGI or ESB, Enterprise Service Bus, or what we had, Corba or SOAP, wow, SOAP, big deal, WSDL, or even gRPC or whatever. And what I say, okay, imagine we would quit the company and we would create a small startup we have a great business idea, and we would create a startup. So what we would do? Would we use ESB, OSGI, or a SOAP, or WSDL, or create API documents? So and it depends a little bit, but this is the idea to the talk. What you can do as a startup. And before I will try to open the chat again, and here it is. Okay. So now, some hobbies. So I have a podcast just for fun, and I write blog, which is a notepad, more or less, and some video courses. Maybe the most interesting part for you, AX TV, I published yesterday's episode today, also with the pointer to the conference. By the way, Richard said I'm a Java 1 rockstar, a JCON 1, of course. I mean, it's a lot bigger right now than Java 1, of course. So, but AX TV, I gather the questions the entire month, or not I'm gathering, you are sending them to a GitHub gist, and I'm answering the questions once a month. Still fun. Yesterday was the 91st episode, which was great. Some AWS courses. Why AWS? Yeah, it happened to be the AWS courses right now, and the next time we do something different. So there are some online workshops in December, some pre-recorded workshops, and now let's create a startup. The first reasonable slide. So, okay, so for me, what a startup would do, a small group of people who like each other, this would be, so we have to have fun with each other, and we would like to create something sensible from the business perspective. So let's, how to approach that. So now, there are different kinds of startups, of course, and what happened to me at a conference, and this is a long time ago, more than 15 years, but I remember the email, and I would like to share it with you. Usually I don't share the customer emails with you, but this one is special. So I would like to show you this. So, this is just a gist. The mail was way longer. I didn't accept the contract, but I helped them for free with a few emails. What they are asking me, so the first sentence is already interesting, right? I'm a very small company that has started a venture to take on Facebook. So, okay, this is quite an adventure. I mean, very small company. I'm a very small company. I'm a freelancer, one person. And Facebook frontend is written in PHP, which is still, I think, true. They compile it, or they did it. Well, they compiled that to C++, but yeah, and the fact is PHP, and they can handle millions of transactions per hour with about 500 million users. I think, meanwhile, it should be more than 500 million. And by the way, this is not the cause of the Facebook outage yesterday for 6 hours. So this was like parallel event, right? So, and now come the question. So do you know of any Java web applications that has similar benchmark to Facebook? What I wanted to answer is, of course, my blog, but this would be, too much fun. Are you in the opinion that Java will scale, bearing in mind that benchmarks is Facebook? So seriously, why not, right? Because you won't run the entire Facebook on one JVM, so you will have to start more JVMs. The question becomes is, will Java be as cost effective as PHP? Because cloud scales indefinitely. The question is, can we pay that? This is the more interesting question. And so the question is, should she or he run PHP or Java? And now the fun begins, and this is where I help them. And they say, my current idea for highly enhanced scalability is as follow: to start with two servers, 2 Apaches and 2 JBoss. So and seriously, if you would like to chase Facebook, this is complete different architecture than if you would like to create an e-commerce store or conference managing system or a publishing platform. So I would say this architecture could be completely, or is completely different to the others, right? It's complete different requirements. So now let's go ahead. So which app could we build? So and why this? Because I think every category would need complete different decisions. So we have chat. And by the way, what I forgot to mention, I'm a Java person, so therefore I would focus on Java because I know Java the best and front-end JavaScript. So you could of course write the backend in assembler, Go, or whatever, but I will stick with Java for now. And more, I believe actually that Java is also great in the clouds. So now chat application, for instance, if you think about chat, right? So what I'm thinking about are messages flowing back and forth. So I would say, usually a chat for me is asynchronous. So if I'm thinking about chat, it's almost event driven, right? It's not like we have a request response, more small messages flowing back and forth. Activity tracker, this is like activity watch, or how to call it. This is what measures how many steps a day we are walking. By the way, I always ask myself why they are measuring the amount of steps and not meters or kilometers, because the amount of steps is a little bit boring. If I would say, okay, I walked 50 kilometers today, this is a complete different, I can estimate it better than 50,000 steps or whatever. So activity tracker. So this is a watch. I mean, the next question is it like an online tracker? As a startup, I would say yes, maybe, right? Because you would like to see your data in real time somewhere. The issue becomes connectivity, but what this would mean is also kind of, I mean, the user would be the watch, right? So we have one actor or one persona is the watch, and the other actor would be probably a management website or something like a Roomba robot. I would say such a robot, there is actually no user interface at all. E-commerce shop like Amazon, a podcast platform or publishing platform. So this would be ideas we could build, or conference platform, of course. And each of these choices would result in complete different architectures. I would say the shop, podcast platform, and publishing platform is more or less boring architecture, which looks like most enterprise applications. I would say we would have probably a database, could be relational or not. Also interesting question, should we go relational or not? And then maybe a small monolith, and we are basically done. So the chat, activity tracker, and robot could be written more efficiently. But with shop, podcast platform, and publishing platform, I would maybe go towards microservices, and the other one more like event driven. This would be my idea I'm thinking about. Okay, now this is very important. Do we have money or not? And actually, I forgot a slide. Was you should have either money or time. You cannot have no money and no time. So you have to decide: should we spend more in engineering, or should we spend more in buying the boring infrastructure and focus on features? This is, the basic decision. What I see is the companies would like to do everything. They would like to use open source without paying for support, or have cloud and just don't use anything of the clouds and rebuild everything what's on the clouds already there by themselves. So the question is, it should be somehow explainable what we are doing. So I would say the best choice would be self-funding because or bootstrapping, because we know what we are doing, and we will try to find the first clients, and we get paid, and then we grow with the app. Spin-off is very similar. So there's a larger company, and the smaller company spins off. And there is an idea, and they are independent. By the way, JavaSoft, this is what happened at Sun Microsystems. Something like this could be a spin-off. And this is a little bit different because the developers get paid, and the development is a little bit more, I would say, how to call it, calm, right? It's not as exciting. Crowdfunding, seed money, and angel investors. So crowdfunding is you are promising some. For instance, with the hardware, it is harder to be self-funding because the hardware is expensive. So something like crowdfunding, as the community buys in advanced devices, would make more sense. So what it means is you have more money up front, but there's not too much money. Seed money and angel investors, a little bit better maybe if you have a good idea. So if you, let's say, you combine the terms like Bitcoin, DevOps, DevSecOps, and blockchain. Blockchain, Bitcoin is the same. So what else? Machine learning, of course. Machine learning, Bitcoin, DevOps, you get billions, and there will be completely different architecture than what we are doing. And also, what's your motivation? So my motivation would be create a small business and have fun with it. But what I heard very common is to have a startup just in with the goal to get sold to a bigger company. So this is completely different, because if I have the idea, business idea, to have a business, by the way, why I'm a singleton, have idea to have fun with something small, then I don't try to grow, of course. But if you like to impress bigger companies, you have to grow as fast as possible. Otherwise, they won't buy you. That's the problem a little bit. And so why I'm talking about money and growing, because if your idea is to take over the world, you will have to have a global infrastructure. You cannot say, my server is in my basement and I try to take over Australia. So this won't work as a Facebook, right? So this is what you have to know in advance as a startup. So the next thing is, what's really interests me, is it monolithic? And for me, microservices in most cases don't make a lot of sense, because what microservices solve for a startup, because what microservice solves is organizational problem. So there are multiple teams, and they can work, isolated from each other, so they can be independent. I just would like to take a look at the chat. So no questions in the chat. What's wrong with you? Usually, the conferences, the chat is overflowing. It's like, does the chat doesn't scale here, JCON, or what's the problem? So the moderator, Richard, gets now a task every minute, ask a question. If there is no question from the community, Richard will have to ask a question. So this is now his homework or keynote work. So monolithic or event-driven. So monolithic architectures, for me, microservices, I would start with very few microservices or monoliths. And why that? Because if the team is small, why we have to create more? This doesn't make any sense, except, of course, we identify pieces which are highly independent from each other. For instance, right? So if you have a payment processor, this could be completely different from our publishing logic. So, and if this is asynchronous by nature, I wouldn't use microservices at all. I would like to I call them stream processors. I found the name in a Kafka tutorial. It is better, but back then I said this is some kind of transceiver, because it transceives the messages, receives them, and it actually stolen the transceiver from Jackstar, from an old Java technology, but it receives the events, it changes the events and sends them somewhere. But they're like stream processor, where if there are events, lots of people are tracking their steps or kilometers or whatever you are tracking, or how often you stood up and sit down a day. So this thing is tracked somewhere in the statistics, and this could be an event, right? So this will be event-driven, completely different architecture. So, and who is the primary actor or persona? Is it a machine like IoT, or is it, or do we need an app? Another important decision. So, what's your vision? So, what I would expect is that we write down why we are great and why we take over the world, so that then we can, why? Because in such a vision document, by the way, also stolen from a very old, it's called Rational Unified Process. This was one of the few things which were very good like a vision statement. So why we are building the system? So one pager, because we learn about the ideas there and the ideas for domain objects. So the next thing, as already mentioned, global versus local customers. So are we in Germany or whenever, or just in the US, or do we have a global audience? This is actually very important, because if you have global customers, I would say public clouds are a must. If you have local customers, you can survive with co-location longer, and co-location is maybe cheaper and easier at the beginning. So this is why this decision is necessary. And what is the user interface? So I mean, do we need a kind of a web app? Do we have to implement a native app? So is it required? Does it have to be that way? And yeah, this is also important at the beginning. And also, to get an idea, are we building Slack, something like Amazon Store, Stack Overflow, or the Roomba robot, which doesn't have any UI at all? It just sends the data in the clouds, and you can set up the timer. This is what happens there. So architecture and design, I think. And this is my perception. I worked with a couple of startups, and they were really interested in boring decisions. They were not that excited about the newest and freshest technology. And I told this at a conference, and someone stood up and told me, what you worked with were not startups. It's like, why not? Because they were not in Silicon Valley. So okay, then you are right. In other words, like German small companies who tried to do something sensible, but they were not like Silicon Valley startups with lots of money. So I would classify startup, as I said, one pizza team, which means a small developer shop who creates something which should be profitable in 1 year or something like this. So boring decisions are the best. So this is why probably Facebook started with PHP back then, and I would just start with Java right away. So, and my personal ideas, what means boring is boring. I would start, to use Java SE. So there was a great session from Taman before my session, and he explained, for instance, JDK 11 HTTP client. So with the HTTP client, I don't need any other library because I have the HTTP client. This is what I mean, by boring decisions. Just take what's there, not too much investigation, just go ahead. So, and I would say what my approach would be is more fun, just to have a proof of concept as fast as possible. But the proof of concept doesn't have to be a hack. We can write, clean code. I would say reasonable code without, too much hacking. We can, from day one, there is no reason, to misname method names, call them M1, M2. You can always call them properly from day one. So it will spend probably 10 minutes longer, but the proof of concept becomes actually almost an MVP, what is called minimum viable product, I think. So simplicity, reduce the amount of moving parts. So recently we were in a cloud workshop, and we had a discussion about databases. And in one point of time, I said, okay, we can take all the databases which are available, but I would say use the following. If we need a relational database, just take Postgres. If we need NoSQL database, just use DynamoDB or other DB, right? And if we need full text search, just commit to Elasticsearch. We don't have, to have 20 different databases just for fun in a single project. So this is what I mean, simplicity. It's not like everything has to be in Postgres, but it could. For instance, Postgres has great key value capabilities and understands JSON natively. So it would be also a great choice, but it doesn't have to. But it's not like a research project. This is what where I'm going. So self-constraining from productivity. This is actually interesting. So as you probably know, I like, Java E, Jakarta E, and microprofile. I do it for years. And maybe why I'm doing this is because, the API is there and it was sufficient in the last years. Think about minimum lovable product instead of MVPs. MLP then. We could, okay, minimum lovable product. Jim Tyrell. So this is a great, yeah. I mean, I don't know whether black and white hello world is minimum lovable product. I would say, I would start with MVP as quickly as possible, because as developer, I'm more afraid of, the YAML and and security in the cloud, IAMs, and all the stuff which makes me nervous. But if I see, the first character on the app, I'm happy. So okay, now it's doable. So Jim, I hope you agree with me. In my context as a startup, that day one should be an MVP, and day two should be MLP. Are you agreed with me? What is the good way to get MVP out to the public? Agree. Oh, Jim agreed with me. Great. And Richard is still lazy. So unbelievable how lazy the moderators actually are at JCON. So now the next thing is self-contraining for productivity. So what I said is micro profile. Why? Because it was there and I don't have to think about this. So this is the only reason. I don't like to make a research every time, every day, research what great libraries are there. We are, how old is Java? 25 years, I think. So in 25 years, we figure out, that the libraries are actually working. There is no need, to search for constantly new stuff. So, so I'm self-contraining for your productivity. Exactly. Perfect. And someone asked me a question, what's the good way MVP out to the public? Exactly. This is what we are talking about. So choose the platform and stick with it. So this is the next thing. For instance, cloud, right? So in recent 2-3 years, cloud became really viable products, and not because this had nothing to do with startups. This is like more about enterprises. And why? Because you can now consider cloud as an extension from your data center, which is not that exciting for a startup. So, but where I'm going with as a startup, if I commit to Azure, Microsoft Azure Cloud, I would actually like to choose the Azure features. It's not like I'm using, I commit to Azure, but then say, oh, I'm too dependent to Azure. So I will abstract from everything. And at the end of the day, you could just, ship a virtual machine to Azure and use no features from Azure. You will have to spend all the time developing features by yourself, but with the hope one day I will port from Azure to AWS if Microsoft goes crazy with the economic conditions. And this was always suspicious to me, because back then we had the same circus with the databases. So we have to write DAOs and what else, the mappers, just not to be depending on Oracle. And in only rare cases, I only know one project actually who from one day to another they migrated from Oracle DB2. So maybe now it is a little bit more common because the services are smaller. But if you have a huge system, migrating from one database to another, there is no business value. If there's no business value, why to do it? And if there is unlikely that such a thing happen, it's not as bad to be dependent on a database. This is so this is a choice as a startup. Will we use cloud features or not? And I would say if I go to AWS, I would absolutely use all the features. I wouldn't go to AWS, but use nothing and replicate whatever is there by myself to decouple from the vendor. So, and the next thing is, I would say business domain use case first design. I don't think in the cloud we will still create all the layers and mappers and super mappers and factories, abstract factories and interfaces and impulse and whatever you did. I would say now is really over in the cloud, right? So let's see. So infrastructure. Now, if we go to the cloud, and now is the question from Jeff Rogers, what's a good way to get MVP out to the public? So there are multiple ways, and this depends a little bit from my perspective. What's your application? Which character is it? If this is a monolith, I would say virtual machines and containers would be the way to go. Why VMs? Actually, EC2 on Amazon is still the cheapest possible option. What's the problem? You will have to create, the load balancers, and you have to auto-scaling groups and launch templates. You will have to do, and VPCs, everything by yourself. So it is a lot more to do, but running this thing is cheap for a monolith. So containers are a little bit more expensive, but the scale better. So if your plan is to take on Facebook, maybe something like a Fargate is better suited than EC2s. Now, and serverless architecture, from my perspective, is the future of cloud. Why? Because what serverless means is we don't care about the infrastructure anymore, and we pay per invocation. So this is actually for a startup genius thing, because you can exactly calculate what a business event costs actually. So this is the idea, right? And why it is event driven? Because let's imagine, we have an activity tracker or the Roomba. What you could do, this IoT device could, for instance, upload a text file to a S3 bucket. Then a Lambda function will wake up, take the file, translate the file to a JSON, write to DynamoDB. The DynamoDB creates a Kinesis streams, and then a Kafka stream wakes up and does, I don't know, some calculations. And the entire chain is completely serverless. If there is no traffic, you won't pay for anything. So you are just paying if something happens on the system. Whereby containers and VMs, you have to pay all the time, right? And the next thing is, if you are kind of a hybrid startup, does MVP have to be highly available already? I don't think so. So for me, it would be prior to. At the very beginning, it really depends, right? If we say we are founded, we have millions of dollars, and we have some ads on the television show or YouTube or whatever, it would be great if our system doesn't break down. Then we need a highly scalable system. If we are bootstrapping our application, I think it's not strictly necessary to be highly available. Okay. Perfect. And so EC2 should be fine for start. EC2 is fine for start, but is not. So the automation is harder. And what EC2 is a virtual machine from Amazon. The automation is harder. You have to, the backup is a little bit harder. You have to attach EBS volumes, think about those schedules. So you have to do more, but it will be the cheapest possible solution. And cloud agnostic or cloud native. So, and the second thing is, if you are in the monolithic space, there's another option. And this is something like a German. So I know this German company called Hetzner, but there are millions other companies. Colocation, you could rent for cheap servers and run the entire stuff by yourself. And this is very possible with Java, because I would say with our services or runtimes we already have, it is fairly cheap, to launch Java in a Docker on somewhere. So this would be probably the cheapest solution. The problem is with such a Hetzner, you cannot, have a global startup. So it is more like a local solution. But I will look at something like this first and then go to the public. So colocation is even cheaper and easier if you know what you are doing, or go to cloud if you already know, I started with EC2, but actually I would like to go serverless. So if you don't agree, we have a nice conversation in the chat. So the chat became more and more active. So I will only have to make it a little bit larger because, I cannot do this. So, or deploy your own Kubernetes on Hetzner servers. Very good point. I actually forgot the slide. There is a very famous quote that Kubernetes is something for build platforms. So it makes perfect sense to take Kubernetes and run on Hetzner because you get your own public cheap cloud. But then it doesn't make any sense from my perspective to install Kubernetes or use EKS from AWS. I would rather migrate then to Fargate. It's far easier, cheaper to run than Kubernetes. So Kubernetes makes absolute sense if you build your own cloud. In a public cloud, my personal opinion, I would never use Kubernetes, except you have already something in place and you have to migrate to the public cloud. But this is not the definition of startup, right? We are starting right now. You have nothing. Yeah, so because Rancher, of course, you can do whatever to go to Hetzner, but this would make sense if you say, okay, Kubernetes on Hetzner is going to be cheaper than EC2 on Amazon, for instance, right? So cloud agnostic or cloud native, I don't believe, to be cloud independent. Why? Because if you look at the Java code, this is identical to all clouds, and the services are similar. What's absolutely not similar is the billing structure. What is not similar is the networking. What's completely different is the security. Like IAM on Amazon is AD on Azure. So I would say, and the configuration is completely different. And what companies try to do is try to use Terraform and say, okay, now I'm cloud agnostic. Like say, okay, Windows has shell and Mac have shell, so now we are OS agnostic, which is not true. The Terraform is just a tool, but the resources for, let's say, Fargate and Azure Container Instances, they look completely different on Terraform. So there is no migration path, I would say, between clouds. So as a startup, I would say I would go full in to Azure Cloud, to AWS Cloud, and maybe also cool thing is, I think the cheapest cloud right now is actually Oracle regarding transfer costs. So Oracle could be actually also a great choice. And you know, at the beginning you can save money, and then if something happens, you can move out, for instance, right? And someone asked me, you know, next question is Cloud Spring or Quarkus, and I already have it on slides. I would use actually the freshest runtime, and the Quarkus is fairly old already, I think 3 years, right? So I would say Quarkus and Micronaut both are very capable in the cloud regarding saving money, because they start fast and save RAM. And Helidon will get there, I would say, because they get more and more stuff from Micronaut. And Open Liberty would be a great choice for, let's say, Kubernetes on Hetzner, less as a runtime for the cloud. Less, I say why? Because it's a little bit more, I would say, how to call it, a little bit more, not complex. It's not as easy. So it takes a few seconds or, you know, minutes longer than the others. They are optimum. If you're starting, take the optimum. And yeah, and Marcel is hyperactive. So Richard, we have to send Marcel a T-shirt or something. And what he's saying is function as a service. And I think, what is function as a service? So for Java developers, it is very easy to explain. It's like a servlet or CGI bin. This is function as a service. You can say, okay, but come on, this is boring. Why we need it? And first, it makes perfect sense for event-driven architectures. So the story I told you with the S3, it makes perfect sense for an AWS Lambda, for instance. And what you shouldn't forget is that the Lambda, for instance, it's not like it is a you know, something we built and microservice with it. It's more like it is event listener to all possible cloud sources and events. And what I said is, if you upload something to S3, there is an S3 event and Lambda can react to it, right? Then there's Lambda destination, so you can pick the thing and write it to SQS, and another Lambda wakes up, picks this, and now, if we take AWS Lambda, we don't need any frameworks anymore, because the Lambda is basically a pojo with a method. By the way, if you would like to see a Lambda, go to my YouTube channel. One of the recent screencasts was about playing Lambda in Java. And this is just one method. The parameters is JSON, serialized with JSON actually. So to having now a framework, when we need a framework, let's say I use Jakarta JSON-B, for instance, if you need to know JSON serialization or deserialization. You could use bean validation if you would like, you know, let's say, validate the input. But I don't think you need dependency injection in Lambda, because Lambda is just a method, right? So, and what's interesting about Lambda is, and now it comes what I told you at the beginning, why Java shines. I think Java is the best possible choice for Lambdas. Why this? The cold start is actually good. So also on my YouTube channel 2 days ago, I got some questions I recorded a screencast. So the Lambda with 128 megs of RAM started in 0.8 seconds, which is cold start. Subsequent starts 1 to 2 milliseconds. And as you probably know, you are built by gigabyte second. So now, technologies like, do I have it? GraalVM could even improve it or not. Really depends. This is now the interesting part. Why? Because if you are a Lambda compiled with GraalVM, there is almost no cold start. So the cold start will be 300 milliseconds plus 10 milliseconds of GraalVM. So it is very, very fast. But the subsequent invocations can be a little bit slower, because a GraalVM is still a little bit slower than standard, you know, Corretto 11. So I would say it is actually not decided whether stock Java or GraalVM are cheaper. It really depends on the load. And what's also interesting is what can happen is, it's just a small tip, if you're running FAS or Lambdas and you dedicate more memory to a Lambda function, you get more CPU. So if you add more RAM to a Lambda function, at the end of the day, it could even run cheaper. So this is an interesting observation. So you have to play with it. But GraalVM is great, but it's not the solution to all problems. And I actually always start with plain Java. What I'm talking about Lambdas, because it was in the chat. So Knative makes, in my personal opinion, less sense in the public cloud because we have Lambda. So why I should install Kubernetes and then try to replicate Lambdas if we have Lambdas. But if your decision is to have your own cloud on Hetzner, this could be an idea. But we are talking about startups right now, right? So I don't think it is a great option to rent Hetzner machines, then install Kubernetes and implement your own Lambda system on Hetzner if you have Lambda on the cloud and the first million invocations are free. So you really need, you have to have your reasons not to use, almost free Lambdas in the cloud. Okay, and OpenStack. Okay, I think OpenStack is a little bit out of fashion. Out of fashion, out of business almost, right? So this is what I would. Sorry, but this is my personal opinion. So Marcel asked me, orchestration choreography of a function sounds quite hard to me. Imagine having hundreds of functions and you want to have an overview of what actually happens when the first function is triggered. Yeah, overview is open tracing. It is natively supported by a product called X-Ray, or you can build your own stuff. So you see something like a service maps, so you know the entire overview of the thing. But I think what I'm completely against, what I saw a company did, they created Monoliths and then split the monolith into functions. And this was terrible. I mean, this is no one knows what's going on. But if you are using Lambdas as event processors, this is a completely different story. This is like, a topic or a stream looks for me like a table, and the Lambda takes from the table, processes the stuff, and writes to another table or another stream. So I would say then Lambdas are maintainable. So, and this is why at the beginning, I try to distinguish between, monolith and event-driven architectures. Okay, so Jeff Rogers somehow, hacks my machine and knows what I would like to talk about, Payara Cloud. He mentioned Payara Cloud, a very interesting story. What they did could be also highly interested for startups. What they did is a very smart move, actually. And this is exactly the opposite what Micronaut and Quarkus and Open Liberty or whatever you stated there. What they are doing is, what Payara is, they are Kubernetes operator, and the application server became the Kubernetes operator, and you are pushing just a war, and the war is replicated automatically to Payara micros, and they are stopped and started by Kubernetes, controlled by Payara. So for you, it feels like serverless application server, right? And you are just pushing a thin wars to the cloud, and it just happens. The only problem is Payara Cloud is not ready from the business problem, so they have to figure it out. I think now it is not available to the general public, but this would be also an interesting idea where you can say this is more like Google App Engine almost, right? So this is or Elastic Beanstalk and Payara Cloud would be somehow comparable. Okay, so we covered a little bit. This was the Micronaut. You asked me about that. So Micronaut and Quarkus, similar approaches. I was told that Micronaut is more appealing to Spring Boot developers, and Quarkus, I mean, for me, it looks Quarkus like all my application servers, so it's very appealing to me. So therefore, I use Quarkus more than Micronaut. But from the runtime perspective, Micronaut is actually great. They're using annotation processors to generate bytecode in advance, and Quarkus uses extensions. Someone asked me, do you know when Payara Cloud will be available to the public? No, but I had recently on my podcast an interview, and you can go to Twitter right now and ask Payara people. So, any opinion on Vertex? I wouldn't use Vertex directly because it's built into to Quarkus, and then I would use Mutiny, for instance, just Vertex. And by the way, as a startup, I would never use Vertex because I don't have Vertex problems as a startup, except I'm building some, orchestration engine. Jelastic, yes, Jelastic also great. So it could be also a reason yeah. Cool. So now I have to go back to slides. Otherwise, my time is almost over. So infrastructure. So clouds, private, public, hybrid, colocation. Now, colocation, we had already public, private. So interesting observation. What you can actually do, you could have privately your Kubernetes cluster with relational databases, start this way. And what you can do, use something like Debezium, which serializes the databases to streams and pushes them to the cloud. So you can have, you can run cheaply the operations. So by the way, what I forgot to mention is usually public clouds, if you're running, EC2 all the time or containers all the time, they are going to be more expensive than usually on-premise servers. So it might be a good idea to run, the first boring workloads on Hetzner or in data center, and then, push the events to the cloud and do the data analytics and machine learning and so forth in the cloud. So therefore, hybrid cloud could actually work. You could say, okay, monolith, on-premise, and events in the clouds. This works well. So programming languages, for me, monoglot. I would say I'd never understood the idea why a startup, everyone should choose a different programming language. So I mean, if we start with Java, I would go with Java. But if you don't like Java, if you like JavaScript, then do everything with JavaScript. And this would be my advice. But still, I would prefer Java for everything, except of course front end, right? So then JavaFX could be a thing. And if you think about web apps, then I would choose web components. This was the session before. So now, interesting observation regarding lambdas. If you take a look at JavaScript, Microsoft, for instance, the main driver to support TypeScript is I think they had huge applications, Office and so forth, and they wanted to have a web version of it, and this was really hard with scripting languages. We don't have such problems with Java. So what means is we have huge advantage on AWS Lambda. Our functions can be larger. So for instance, what we frequently do, we can have a Lambda, which is behind API gateway, and this Lambda supports get, post, put, delete, everything, right? So whereas if you look at the scripting counterparts, what happens there is the idea is they would create one Lambda for get HTTP, for put HTTP, and they get millions of Lambdas. So I would say with the Java approach, we could be more productive and even deployment could be faster, because I would say we have 5 times less Lambdas than the counterparts in other scripting languages. This was my observation. So now why in the scripting languages, the Lambdas are so small, because it is harder to build larger systems. And in Java, we are very good with it. And you can actually create so-called fat Lambda and put a lot more in a Lambda. It will be not a problem for me. So, and this is how to deal with complexity. If you approach this way, you don't have too many moving parts. So cloud native, I would say the main difference to before is the first point is cost-driven development. So I would say instead of profiling the CPU, you will profile your bill, right? So you will say, okay, what causes yet the most costs, and this is going to be optimized. So this is not necessary inside, inside your code. It could be even, a network device, a NAT gateway, VPC endpoint, or whatever. It costs huge amount of money. So we will have to, refactor our Java code to make it cheaper. So this is completely different what we did before. I had a conversation, why are you mapping everything and so forth, and there was actually no actual answer. Now we have business reasons now to refactor our code. The infrastructure as code is for me like the new Xdoclet, right? So especially, Kubernetes and Helm. So if I look at Helm, so okay, this is what we had 25 years ago. Funny story, all the public offerings, Azure Container Instance or ECS Fargate, the configuration is a far simpler than Kubernetes. So actually, I don't think, there is a worth of running Kubernetes in public cloud. And usually you also will have to pay for the control plane of Kubernetes, so it's more expensive. Return of POJOs, actually in serverless, we only have POJOs. It looks like Java SE 11, hopefully soon 17, but right now like 11. And the Java code is extremely portable. So actually you can pick AWS Lambda and put it to Azure functions, and it's exactly the same code. And the future is serverless. Why? Not because we don't need servers anymore, because I think what the future is, we would like to pay per something. And not, calculate and not pay all the time for all the servers. And this is actually why serverless is the future from business perspective. And, startups are all about business. So vendor or cloud agnostic, I would say just use cloud features. This would be my thing. Is not like I wouldn't try, if I need a NoSQL Datenbank, I would go DynamoDB on AWS, even so DynamoDB is not available on Azure. And if I need, I would like to take on Facebook, and I would really like to have a relational database, I would, pick Google Spanner, even if it's not available on other cloud platforms. So this is what I would do. And if I need, a decent build solution, I would pick GitHub on Microsoft, and I try, to just use generic Git, because then I'm depending on Microsoft. Netflix should pay per minute watch time. Exactly, Marcel. Per second, actually. Lambdas are now are built by millisecond. So vendor dependencies also, right? So what I already said, I don't think it is reasonable to decouple from DynamoDB, Spanner, or GitHub, right? I would just use it. I mean, period. So portability. So what does it mean? Let's say someone mentioned in the chat, EC2. Would it mean if we use EC2 and we use, the elastic load balancing, we wouldn't use Amazon-specific features in order to be portable to Azure Cloud? I don't think so, right? We would use all the features. Or if you're on Amazon, we wouldn't use, the Route 53's health checks because it might be not available in other clouds. I would say I would go full in the cloud and then see what happens. We are a startup. Then API versus SPI becomes less relevant. But what I still like is a plain Java code. So if possible, for instance, on AWS, you can decide whether you implement an Amazon interface or go with plain Java method. I never implemented the Amazon interface and just go with the Java method. And cloud native versus integrated services. This is also a thing. What I see more and more, for instance, more and more services, let's say Amazon again, there's RDS, which almost looks like a Postgres. And there is an Postgres implemented by Amazon from scratch called Aurora. So I would actually start with Aurora. So if I use the cloud, I would really like to use the cloud and not like to pretend that I'm portable. Either we use this or not, right? And Kubernetes, what I said, I don't think there is a reason to pick Kubernetes as a startup in public cloud if there are other serverless offerings. There is Kubernetes Fargate, where you don't have to care about the underlying structure, but still, why not use Lambda or ECS Fargate? Way simpler. So development, I would say everything has to be fully automated from day one. And I would even go with continuous delivery. Try to deliver continuously, whether human without human intervention. Just practice it from day one. CI/CD should be fast. This would be my prior number one. If I have to wait hours until something happens, I lost my interest. Black box test coverage. So use Cypress or similar tooling just to test everything from outside. And code coverage and unit tests. I mean, we can do it. Unit tests for complex logic. No Java doc, of course. Man, who will read that? No one. And main branch only. I would say all the talks, no feature branches or not. Just start with main branch. Every commit is built and should be stable. So this is the main idea. Okay, front end. The next thing is front end is frequently changed. For me, it would mean we always separate the backend from the front end. So I think this is reasonable best practice. So if we just would like to replace a CSS, why to redeploy the backend or the corresponding Lambda? Should be separated. Simplicity, no migrations, full control. So I personally wouldn't choose frameworks anymore. So I would just go, with something like lit. This was the session from before, and web components plain, and then pick frameworks if we really need to. Native required, also interesting. So could we just use a PWA, or do we have to implement a native app? Because implementing native app takes time. You have to submit it to the App Store, and for instance, Windows Store just supports, offline apps and PWAs. And on time, we have 2 minutes left. This was the best keynote timing in the history of JCON, I think. Any questions left? Oh, Christian asked me, what about cloud API gateways? Isn't it something to avoid as another service bus? Very good, Christian, very good question. So the question is, API gateway is very good for as the entry point. If you would like to serve, your web app, you could have an API gateway with HTTP API gateway with a Lambda behind, and you have your and the Lambda could be actually a JAX-RS resource on Fokus. So you can actually ship a microprofile JAX-RS resource with Quarkus as Lambda, as native or GRAL. And you're right, the API gateway is only, for me, interested on the edge, and all other Lambdas are listening to events. They don't know each other, and they don't listen to HTTP events. Exactly. Any other questions? Christian and Marcel are outstanding. Jeff Rogers, also very good. And of course, the multiple lovable product is very important. And then if we are that far, that after our first automated deployment, then we have to think about what's called minimal or maximum lovable product. This should be the new term, max LP. Okay. Thank you and see you next time. Bye.